November 18th, 1958. What seemed a routine journey for the freighter Carl D. Bradley suddenly twisted into one of Lake Michigan's greatest maritime tragedies. Few realized that decades of hidden steel fatigue, long ignored, would be tested by a single violent storm. Exactly how such a celebrated vessel could break apart so swiftly and what it left behind remains a story demanding answers. Launched in 1927 at the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio, the Carl D. Bradley was considered an engineering marvel of her time. Measuring 638 feet, she claimed the title of the longest ship on the Great Lakes for more than 2 decades. Her hull, assembled from thick steel plates, relied on tens of thousands of rivets, each hammered by hand, row after row, binding her structure from bow to stern. This was the standard of the era, long before the widespread adoption of welded seams. Riveted construction offered strength, but it also introduced points of weakness. Each rivet hole, each seam, became a place where stress could concentrate, especially under the repeated bending and flexing that came with years of heavy service. The steel itself reflected the metallurgical limits of the 1920s. Pre-war American steel was high in sulfur and phosphorus, which made it more brittle, especially in the cold. The ship's designers could not foresee how decades of vibration, twisting, and pounding from Great Lakes storms would test the material beyond its original promise. As a self-unloader, the Bradley's innovative conveyor and 160-foot boom were celebrated, but her long, unbraced midsection made her susceptible to bending forces, especially when sailing empty. Her blueprints reveal a vessel built for capacity and efficiency, not for the fatigue science that would only be understood years later. The riveted seams, so common in the 1920s, lacked the resilience of modern welds. Over time, small cracks could form around the rivets, growing invisible beneath layers of paint and steel. Routine inspections focused on corrosion and visible damage, rarely probing beneath the surface for signs of deeper fatigue. The Carl D. Bradley began her career as a symbol of progress, but her very foundation carried the silent inheritance of her age, a vulnerability that would one day be exposed. Inspection records from the final years of the Carl D. Bradley's service reveal a pattern of small warnings that, in hindsight, carried enormous weight. In April and again in October of 1958, Coast Guard surveyors noted the appearance of hairline cracks in the bottom plating while the ship was in dry dock. These cracks, though subtle, were recorded in the official logs as points of concern, dismissed at the time as minor, yet quietly accumulating beneath the vessel's paint and steel. The repair invoices from those seasons show a series of patch jobs, each one intended to keep the Bradley in operation until the scheduled winter layup, but never addressing the underlying fatigue. The ship's maintenance history included more than routine wear. In 1957, the Bradley collided with another vessel at Cedarville. Shipyard records and crew correspondence from that year reference hull damage described as badly dented, with instructions to nurse her along until a full repair could be made. Some repairs were completed, but not all damage was thoroughly documented or fixed. There were also reports of unrecorded groundings during the 1958 shipping season. These incidents, left out of formal logs, may have introduced new stress points, invisible to the eye but critical in the ship's ultimate fate. Each event, each neglected crack, each deferred repair, added to the silent tally of structural weakness. By the time the Bradley set out on her final voyage, she carried not just the scars of a hard-working freighter, but a legacy of unresolved damage. The evidence, scattered across inspection notes and repair bills, pointed to a ship whose vulnerabilities had become a matter of record long before the storm ever found her. At 5:30 p.m. on November 18, 1958, a sharp metallic crack cut through the roar of the storm. The Carl D. Bradley, battered by hours of relentless wind and wave, shuddered as her midsection gave way. Crewmen on the bridge and in the engine room felt the deck beneath their feet begin to sag, the familiar steel suddenly foreign and untrustworthy. From the bridge, the stern appeared to drop away, the ship's backbone bending under forces it could no longer resist. Power flickered, then failed entirely. In a matter of seconds, lights that had glowed against the gloom vanished, leaving only the howl of the wind and the confusion of darkness. The vessel, once a single entity, was now two halves moving independently in the heaving lake. Alarms rang out. On the stern, men rushed to the lifeboats, only to find cables tangled and the boats impossible to launch. At the bow, a single life raft broke free as the forward section tilted. The Bradley structure, tested for decades, had finally reached its limit. Within minutes, the ship was fully broken, darkness closing over the chaos as the lake claimed its prize. Men spilled from the wreckage into water just above freezing, 36 degrees by the Coast Guard's logs. The shock of cold hit like a physical blow, stealing breath and numbing limbs in seconds. Darkness pressed on every side, broken only by the white of cresting waves and the distant flicker of storm-lit sky. Gusts still roared at 60 miles an hour, driving spray and sleet across the surface. The Bradley's two halves slipped beneath, leaving only scattered debris and a single life raft bobbing in the chaos. Survivors fought to reach that fragile raft, hands slipping on ice-slick canvas, boots filling with water heavy as anchors. The lake's surface heaved with 15-foot waves, each one threatening to tear men from the raft or plunge them beneath. Some clung to floating wreckage, calling out for shipmates lost in the blackness. The water's cold was relentless, survival time measured in minutes. Beneath them, the lakebed waited 300 feet below. In those first moments, the odds weighed against every man who entered the water. The struggle was no longer with the storm, but with the elements themselves, a test of endurance, luck, and the faint hope of rescue before the cold claimed them all. Elmer Fleming remembered the moment the raft broke free. We clung to it as the waves crashed over us. The cold was so deep you could feel it in your bones. I kept thinking of home and the men we'd lost, he later told investigators. Frank Mays, huddled beside him, described how the night stretched on. The raft was just a patch of canvas and air. We took turns holding the ropes, trying to keep each other awake. Ice formed in our hair, and the wind never let up. Eventually, only Fleming and I were left. 14 hours passed. Darkness, sleet, and relentless waves blurred the hours together. Search planes dropped flares, distant and unreachable. Mays recalled, sometimes we could see the lights, but it was hours before anyone found us. The cold was incredible. A Coast Guard archivist later explained, their survival defied the odds. Water that cold can take a man in less than an hour. The raft and their determination made the difference. These testimonies, preserved in official transcripts, remain the clearest window into that night's ordeal. The rescue ended with only 2 men returned to shore, but the consequences of that night rippled far beyond the storm. In the weeks after the Carl D. Bradley's sinking, the United States Coast Guard issued new directives to every inspector on the Great Lakes. Annual hull surveys became mandatory for older vessels, with a special focus on fatigue cracks and structural stress in midsections. For the first time, non-destructive testing using ultrasonic and magnetic methods was required to search for hidden weaknesses. These rules, written into federal law and the American Bureau of Shipping Codes by 1961, forced an entire industry to confront the dangers that decades of service could hide. In Rogers City, the loss became a wound carried by every family. Each November 18th, the town gathers at sunset for the Carl D. Bradley Memorial Bell tolling. 33 names are read aloud, each followed by a single chime from the ship's bell. The ceremony is quiet, marked by wreaths and the distant sound of ship horns from the harbor. For many, it is a moment to remember not just the men, but the lessons written in steel and water. Survivors, descendants, and neighbors stand together, holding memory as a form of resilience. The story of the Bradley is preserved in these rituals, in the new rules that protect sailors, and in the shared promise that such loss will not be forgotten. On November 18, 1958, the Carl D. Bradley broke apart at 5:30 p.m., leaving only 2 survivors out of a crew of 35. Coast Guard records and survivor testimony confirm the ship's midsection fractured in heavy seas after years of documented hull fatigue and deferred repairs. Inspection logs from earlier that year noted hairline cracks, and a 1957 collision had left unaddressed damage. Yet the exact sequence of rivet failure and steel brittleness under stress remains a subject of technical debate. Following the disaster, federal regulations were updated to require stricter fatigue testing and hull inspections for all Great Lakes freighters. In Rogers City, annual memorials and bell toll ceremonies ensure the crew is not forgotten. The loss of the Carl D. Bradley stands as a factual reminder. In shipping, every oversight carries a cost, and every lesson is written in record, not myth.